Okay, perfect. We are going to get started because I want to give as much time as possible to the different things that we're getting into with this session. Thank you to those of you that have already entered in the chat what brings you to this session and your interest in assessment. Hopefully there will be something for every one of you because like the session title said, this is an assessment smorgasbord. It's very different from some of the other presentations that I've done because it feels very disorganized for me because it's a lot of different things that I tried to bring all together to give everybody a little bit of taste of maybe there's something you're looking for when it comes to assessment. My name is Jackie Stevens. I am a teacher at Mora High School. I primarily teach 7th grade and 9th grade English. I also have time in my day for instructional coaching, and I'm our district staff development coordinator. So just to give you a little preview of what this session is going to be, we're going to look at a resource called Testing 123. I'll provide some other assessment resources, some question stems, talk about aligning your assessments to the standards, talking about aligning your assessment practices to the beliefs you have about teaching and learning. And then I'm also going to show you a free assessment tool called Edulastic, which has totally transformed the assessment that I do in my classroom, and I absolutely love it. One thing, there are a lot of links throughout this presentation. At the end of the presentation, I will put the link in the chat box, and I will also add the link to the presentation to the SCED session resources so that you can find it later there as well. Okay. We're going to start off by just watching a little video. This video is from some Canadians. So it talks about assessment and grading specifically, but instead of using the word grades or grading, they use the word mark or markings because that's how they talk about it in Canada. So the image might be a little laggy as it goes, but you should be able to hear it okay.
And now a sneak peek at the new comedy series, Mr. D.
There goes your weekend, eh, Markin?
Not really. Let me explain how this works. If these are regular tests, what I would do is I would find the smart students, Maya, and I would mark hers first.
Right.
Then I'd use that as my answer key. But these are essay questions. Now, if I were to read these, it would take forever. So I don't. So I look at their mark going into it. Okay, like Maya, where's Maya? Has the highest mark in the class. There she is. So that's my answer key.
Don't you already know the answers?
Sometimes theirs are better. I got to give her a good mark, a couple circles, and then sometimes too vague.
Right.
That way I don't have to give her 100.
Yeah,
They only look
keep
at
it
the mark,
realistic.
96. I give her a little more than she has going in. That way she won't come back.
Right.
Challenge me. Okay?
That's a good system.
Jimmy, look at Jimmy. Nothing.
Right, it's never nothing.
Garbage. Waste of time. 33, there's some words there, but I have no time to read them. So then I get angry. Jimmy, ridiculous.
Right.
This has got to stop.
He can say the same thing to you.
Okay? You got the system?
Yeah, it's a good system, buddy.
You do those ones.
You want me to mark them?
You don't really mark. You just
All right.
put marks on it. You put a circle. You circle a
That sounds
number.
good. I'm a forger.
Okay, here's Mike. Now, Mike, he's got a 62.
You should give him an 80.
Give him
That'll
an
make
80.
his day.
Make his day.
Right?
Okay. And he goes home. His parents are excited. I like that. Finally.
Like you've been rooting for him the whole
Yeah.
time.
About
Right.
time. Thank
That's
you.
good.
This person, Shauna, I don't like her. Drives me nuts.
Right.
So what I do is I fail her on the exam, but I just give her enough to pass the course, so I don't have to teach her again. So it's like a lot of check marks, some question marks, underline some things, couple good comments.
Mediocre.
I haven't used that one. That's a good one. Happy face, smile.
That's disturbing.
You are almost a teacher.
Mr. D. Monday starting January.
Okay, so that video, obviously a little bit of satire there, but some of the ideas in it are not that far removed from what I'm sure some of us have experienced when we assess our students in the past. We sometimes have a tendency to incorporate classroom management type decisions into the assessments of our students. And so what I'm presenting today is trying to shift away from that and make sure that we aren't incorporating things into our grades that we really don't want into in our grades by having better assessments. Okay. So the first thing I want to show you is just kind of a fun resource. It's actually from the Department of Ed, and it is called Testing 1, 2, 3. And it has just a bunch of different resources about assessment. And so you can see there's the step 1, assess, step 2, analyze, step 3, take action. And there's a ton of different resources within it. One of the things that we'll just click on assess real quick. I actually really like this infographic. And we'll give it a moment to load. But if we look at this, it talks about all the different types of assessments we have in our classes. So it talks about the informal formative assessments that are done daily in the form of exit tickets or class polls. It provides evidence of learning of the lesson size learning target, and it helps us answer the questions, have students learned the lesson's learning target and where to next? Then we have our more formal formative assessments that are done weekly, more likely in the form of quizzes. And it shows evidence that students have retained learning across related lessons. And it answers the questions, have students retained learning from previous lessons? So kind of a chunk of lessons together with a quiz, you see how well they did. Then you move into the classroom summative assessments that are done monthly. Notice it says summative assessments are done more so on a monthly basis. I think sometimes we think that we should have summative assessments more frequently than that, but there really is a lot of formative work that needs to go in between there. And that comes in the form of a unit test, a performance task, something like that. And it shows evidence of retained learning across lessons and an achievement level. So what are my students' current achievement levels? And then we get down to the district or school tests, which are interim assessments, benchmark assessments. I know here in Mora, we use the FAST testing with the A reading and A math as those benchmark assessments throughout the year. You might have different ones that you use as well. And that's really helping us see, is our curriculum aligned with the standards? Because it's those benchmark assessments that look overall if students are meeting the benchmarks. And then finally, at the state level, of course, we have the standardized assessments, the MCAs. And notice it says that it is most useful to school and district leaders to evaluate curriculum and programs. It doesn't say that the classroom teacher should be using a student's MCA scores to make decisions about what to do with that student. It's more that holistic view about how school leaders can use it for those curriculum assessments. So it's important to know the data of where our students have been. But even, like I said, this is from the Department of Education. Even the Department of Education doesn't say that the MCA scores are most useful for a student's individual curriculum planning. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is focused on these classroom assessments, the daily, the weekly, the monthly, and things that each individual teacher will really use. So there are a lot of other resources on the Testing 1, 2, 3 website. I invite you to give it a look around sometime because there's just a wealth of information that is provided to us from the state. Okay. The next thing, like I said, I'm going to share this at the end of this session, but I have just a bunch of links on here that are interesting to look at. These bottom two are podcasts, or you can listen to them as an article as well. How accurate are your grades? like we saw in the video from Mr. D, sometimes things sneak into our grades that we don't want to get into our grades. The Phy-Ed and Health sample assessments are directly from the Department of Ed. When they changed the Phy-Ed and Health standards, they actually came up with a whole bunch of assessment ideas as well, which is super fun. And then we'll just look at this social studies assessment page real quick because there are some interesting links. So obviously this is the Minnesota Center for Social Studies Education. We know that there's no state test for social studies unless you consider the civics test. But down under here where it talks about beyond the bubble history assessments, if you happen to be a history or social studies teacher, know any of them. It talks about this website Beyond the Bubble unlocks the vast digital archive of the Library of Congress to create history assessments of thinking, or HATS, history assessments of thinking, and explore over 100 easy to use assessments that measure students' historical thinking rather than recall of facts. So those of you that mentioned that you were looking for some deeper types of assessments or some of those alternative ideas, you can sort by US history, world history, sourcing, background knowledge, use of evidence, and they just have examples of the assessments that get students beyond just remembering dates and names and places. So just wanted to show you that resource real quickly. Again, it'll be linked when I share the presentation later. Okay, so question stems. I'm not sure how many people have used question stems in the past when writing quizzes. I've actually moved to using them a lot recently. There are a few different links here. We are a Marzano school, so I liked this. I actually don't notice a lot of differences between the Marzano question stems and Bloom's question stems. But here, if you are at the retrieval level where it involves recalling information, then here might be some terms that you would see, and then the question stems that you might use. I'll make that bigger. Question stems that you might use when writing a question that matches that level. The Bloom's taxonomy is going to look very similar. Again, it has the different levels: remembering, understanding, applying, keywords that you might see, and then question stems. And then one other one that I want to show you. So this is not a link, but if you, oh, hold on. If you Google Kids at the Core question stem bank, this used to be a website and I loved it, and it doesn't exist anymore, but some people have saved the resources. Let's do grade 7, and this is for ELA, but it'll come up and you'll see, oh, there's our bell system. You'll see that it is from, if I scroll down a little bit here, from Kids at the Core, which used to be kidsatthecore.com. And these are for the ELA standards for 7th grade. So for reading literature and reading informational text, site-specific evidence when possible. They have basic, the levels remembering and understanding, this actually meeting the standard level at the applying and analyzing level, and then expanded, evaluate, and create. And so it has sample question stems for specifically reading. So you would say, which of the following references can be drawn from these 2 quotes? And then that's helping students infer from the text evidence. I actually used these question stems a lot when rewriting a lot of our novel quizzes. I would try to have the majority of my questions from this standard column, a few from expanded, and a few from basic. So helping all students sort of be able to demonstrate their knowledge. But just really interesting question stems that help, especially if you do any ELA teaching, but the other question stems are great as well. So let's take a look quickly at, these are some of our 4th grade social studies standards, and just look at how I use question stems in my classes. So I'm going to look at the words in the standard, locate and identify. We'll start with that first, and then we'll go to use and interpret. Okay, so let's go back. Let's do this. We'll do blooms today. So I'm going to look for the words locate or find. And I can see find is a key word under remembering. And so where is that? So you could show students a map and have them locate it. Which one is, so if they're locating and naming, those are both in finding something, naming something. Obviously they're 4th grade, so they're in the remembering one. There are all sorts of different question stems you could use to help them locate or name. Then the other standard says to use and interpret. Well, here up at the understanding level, I see the word interpret. So they're interpreting maps. So now you have a bunch of question stems that you could find which one makes the most sense for interpreting. So maybe it's something like explain what is happening in this part of the world based on this map. So just one of the ways that you can use question stems and a few different examples that you can use. I actually go straight to the standard. I look at the words that are used in the standard, and then I look at the question stem banks to write my questions for my assessments. It takes a little bit more time for sure, but it also helps me make sure that I'm not just asking basic comprehension questions all the time or basic recall questions all the time, that I am getting into some of those deeper level of questions by using those question stems. Because sometimes they come really easily and sometimes they don't come as easily. Okay. All right, so once we have written our quiz by thinking about the different types of assessment that we saw on the Testing 123 website, and then creating wonderful standards-based assessments using our question stems and our standards, then we want to look at what do we do with that information? And so this is a little video. This shows how to use it manually. So I will show you a tech-enhanced way of assessing a little bit later at the end of the presentation. But for now, this is an interesting way to get more information from the quizzes and we'll wait for the bell. From the quizzes and assessments that you give your students if you give a paper-based form. So here we go.
In this video, you're going to learn how to aggregate test and quiz scores so you can learn more about what your students know. Okay, so you have a stack of tests or quizzes. Right now, you might only be grading these and then entering the scores into your gradebook. Chances are you'll probably go over the results with students, but there's one more step you might not be taking, something extra you can do really fast with those tests to make sure the results work even harder for you. It's called data aggregation. Any process in which information is expressed in summary form so it can be analyzed. Here's how it works. Let's say this is your quiz. As many teachers do, you make an answer key for it. Okay, so here's your first quiz to grade. It's Jamie's, and she has gotten one question wrong, number 2. Now, instead of just flipping Jamie's test over and moving on to the next one, just go ahead and put a tally mark next to number 2 on your answer key, and put another one next to item A, the one Jamie chose incorrectly. Now let's move on to the next quiz. Marcus got 2 questions wrong, number 7 and number 8. Okay, let's record those, and we'll mark down the answers he chose instead. Done with that. Here's Holly's quiz. She also got number 2 wrong, and she marked the same wrong answer as Jamie. Interesting. Let's tally that over on our answer key. Once you've finished grading all of the quizzes, you have an aggregate, a summary of how each student answered every question that they got wrong. This will tell you which questions were the most problematic and deserve the most attention. You find that 12 out of your 25 students have gotten number 2 wrong, and every kid who got it wrong chose carrot. This may be a misconception, or it may just be a bad question. It probably confused the heck out of your kids. If it were me, I would just give that point back to everyone. Question number 4 got a lot of wrong answers too, but notice that students chose a variety of incorrect answers, so that doesn't necessarily mean this was a bad question. It might just mean you need to do more review of this concept with the students who got it wrong. However, because this was an all of the above question, it's possible that students simply didn't read the whole question carefully enough. When you go over the quiz results with students, find out how many students missed primarily because they just weren't careful. That information will help you decide how to proceed. For some questions, like this one, you may find that very few or no students got it wrong. This probably just means that students have mastered the concept. Turning all this information into a summary does take a few more minutes than simply marking your quizzes and filing them away. But considering the fine-tuned learning your students will get from it and the sense of control you'll get knowing precisely where student misunderstandings are, the extra few minutes is worth it.
So I think when it comes to looking at our assessments from that way, you'll notice that Jennifer Gonzalez there said that it might be a bad question. And I think whenever we're really working on making our assessments better, we have to have a dose of humility and understand that we might not have written a great test question. For some of us, I'm guessing that you write that test the night before you give it, which is not at all how you're supposed to do assessments, but we all know that that happens a lot. So I think there is something to the fact that if we take that extra step to really review it, we might find out tons of students got that wrong. So either I did a bad job of teaching it, or I did a bad job of writing the test question, and not necessarily always putting it on like, oh, those students just didn't understand it. And so I think one of the things that we want to keep in mind always when we look at assessments is keeping that humility. And that humility comes when we really look at some of that data from our assessments, that we can see, oh, tons of people got this wrong. It's probably not the fault of all my students. It's probably something that I could have done better at some point. All right, so the next 5 things I want to show you are from Rick Wormley. He is an amazing presenter. If you ever get a chance to attend one of his webinars, I was lucky enough to see him in person last summer. He does a lot of work with assessment and making our assessment stronger. And so we're just going to look at 5 belief statements that I would imagine most of us agree with when it comes to teaching and learning. And then 5 things we should be doing or not doing with our assessments to make them align with our beliefs. So here's our first one. If we believe that we should teach for subject mastery and not short-term memory, okay, and I'm guessing most of you out there would prefer for your students to master the subject and not necessarily just commit it to their short-term memory. So if that's what we believe, then We will avoid test questions that ask only for basic recall of information. That's where those question stems can come in handy, moving farther up the taxonomy, either Marzano or Bloom's taxonomies, to get beyond the basic recall of information. And here's one that is a little bit less common, I think. We will put previous curriculum on subsequent assessments, even months later. Rick Wormley is actually, I would maybe say, a little extreme with this, but he does standards-based assessments. And if he is teaching a student and 3 months later he asks them to perform an assessment of information from 3 months ago and they can't do it, he will go back and change their grade from 3 months ago because he says they obviously really didn't learn it yet then. That might be a little bit extreme, but the idea that if we want them to build an understanding of our curriculum, we will continue to put that information on our assessments months later, that there will be a few review questions on each of our assessments so that our students don't start to think that we're done with that, it's over, we've moved on. Okay, the next statement of if we believe is that whoever does the editing does the learning. And when I talk about editing, I don't just mean editing your writing or editing something like that, but fixing any sort of problems, so that if you're the one looking for the problems, you're really doing a lot of learning as well. So if we believe that, then we will stop correcting students' work so often. Instead, we will put a dot at the end of the line or in the general area of the issue in a math problem or lab write-up and ask students to identify and fix the mistakes. If necessary, we will provide a one-word clue as to the nature of the error. So not putting so much of the correcting of work on the teacher, but back on the student and telling them, there's a mistake here, figure out what it is and make your corrections, and that they're actually going to do a lot more learning that way than if we do the corrections and give them back. Because whether you've done an online assessment or a paper assessment, I'm sure we've all experienced giving the assessment back to students and then having them not look at it at all, crumble it up and put it in the garbage, click on their results of their electronic assessment and then get rid of it. And they don't actually look at it to help them improve for the next time. There are always some students that do. They take it really seriously. They want to know why they got it wrong. That's fantastic. But I think too many of our students are looking at the grade only. And if they find the grade itself acceptable, then they won't try to push further into their understanding. So this is one way of having that actually be built in to your assessment process, that at the end of the assessment, you have them go back and fix the errors themselves by simply identifying where there is an error. All right, our third of our 5 belief statements, if we believe that fair isn't always equal. And I think most of us can agree with that one. So fair isn't always equal. We will make sure that our grades report only what students know and can do after learning cycle, not the routes they use to get there. So we might have an understanding of how we present our information to students, and then we assess them at the end of it. And if they didn't learn it the exact way that we taught it, then they just didn't get it. But really, students can show what they know in a lot of different ways, and starting to think about those different ways. And I know it can sound like it's sort of a management nightmare of sorts. What I have started doing, and I'll show this a little bit later too, is all of my assessments are standards based. And when I say assessments, I mean like those weekly quizzes and summative assessments are standards based. So for every quiz, a student will get multiple grades in the grade book, 1 per standard. And if a student didn't do well on one particular standard, I will ask them to do something else to demonstrate that they can meet it. Maybe you couldn't meet it on the test I gave you. Maybe you couldn't meet it on that quiz. Maybe you couldn't meet it on that day. And I'll have something else for them to do to demonstrate for me that they can meet that standard. And then I'll just go in and change the grade for that one standard from that assessment. Another way you could do that is asking them and say, okay, this is the part that you didn't know how to do. What could you do to show me that you know it? And ask students if they have an idea as well, because there are a lot of different ways that you can assess students. It doesn't necessarily always have to be they all took the exact same quiz, and that's how I know that they can do that skill. So being open to the fact that there might be different routes that students can show you what they know and what they can do. All right, number 4 of our 5 belief statements. If we believe that students learn at different speeds, definitely, then we will not only allow, but also encourage students to redo assignments and tests for full credit. I think people are getting a lot more comfortable with the idea of redos and retakes. I think there are still some people that aren't totally comfortable with the idea of having them do it for full credit. I heard a good analogy about this this summer that there's a lot of fully functioning adults out in the world that did not pass their driver's license test on the first time. And you are not given any restrictions on your license once you finally do pass the test. You can take that driver's license exam as many times as you want to, and when you finally get that driver's license, nobody says, well, since you had to take it 3 times, you're not going to be able to drive at night. We're going to bump you down with your put some restrictions on your license because you didn't get it all the first time. And I think we have this idea that students aren't able to always redo things in the future. And that's just really not true, because you can retake pretty much any assessment that matters in life as many times as you need to. Students retake the ACTs. You can retake the MTLEs. You can retake pretty much any assessment you would need to until you get the achievement level that you need to get to. So why we still have this practice in K-12 education of either not allowing redos or not allowing them for full credit is a little bit of a mystery to me. And I think it's something that we need to start reconsidering and trying to move forward with. I will say that, of course, that does come with a classroom management piece. You don't want a ton of kids after school retaking assignments. There are a lot of resources out there about how to manage redos and retakes. If you're looking for any of those, please let me know, and I'll be happy to email you some of those resources as well. And the 5th statement, if we believe that anything that diminishes the accuracy of a grade should be removed from our grading practice, and that compliance is not evidence of mastery. And this is sort of getting to what we saw in the Mr. D's video, that just because you don't like a kid, or just because they bother you, or just because you don't want them to come back and challenge, then we will not include anything in the determination of a student's final report or their grade that does not reflect evidence of performance based on standards. So we would not include reading log minutes, because just because they write down that they are reading is not actually evidence of any of the standards. None of them. Bringing supplies to class, not in any of the standards. Keeping their notebook neat. Participating in class, unless of course you are an ELA teacher and you are assessing discussion and their ability to participate in a discussion, but then they would need to know that ahead of time. You would have to have a rubric for that type of discussion. Or perhaps you're going to use a class discussion as a way to assess their performance of another standard, in which case they would need to know that ahead of time as well. But just you were here and you raised your hand and you did stuff is not a standard. Homework and their ability to complete something at home, when we know that students have very, very different abilities to complete work at home for a variety of different reasons. Group projects, attendance, effort, behavior, all of those things are not in our standards. Assessing those things might seem like it makes our jobs easier as teachers, but they are not standards. So bringing them into the grade in any way does diminish what your grade stands for. And that would also be back, one of the first slides shows that a link to the podcast about how accurate are your grades, and it will touch on some of those things as well and give some ideas of what to do instead. We actually had a situation where a teacher offered extra credit for students bringing in boxes of Kleenex, and then there was an eligibility issue when a game was coming up and a student really wanted to participate in the game, and the teacher said, well, we don't have any assignments coming up, and our assistant principal actually went out and bought a box of Kleenex for the student to turn into the teacher so they could play in their game. No knowledge of any kind was gained there for anybody. So just something to keep in mind. Okay, so those are just, like I said, I wanted to look at making sure that the beliefs we have about teaching and learning are aligning to what our assessment practices are, because I think that's something that we get lost in the weeds of and think about what's easiest to administer, and we want to make sure that we're always thinking about aligning those beliefs to our practices. Finally, I said I would show you an online assessment tool that helps assess in a lot of different ways, and I will definitely show you that. I actually, for today, I took screenshots, but this is a link to the website when I send you the presentation at the end, and this is a link to their YouTube page where they have tons of tutorial videos on how to do this. Edulastic is free, and the free product is totally robust and amazing. I've used it for the past 2.5 years. I've never said, I feel like I really need the paid version, which I just want to point that out, because I think a lot of times we get interested in a product and we're like, oh, they do have a free version, but then we start to realize we actually would prefer a lot of the features of the paid version. I have never said like, oh, I really feel like I need the paid version of Edulastic. And I will also say there is no wonderful, happy way to just take your Google Forms quizzes and upload them into an Edulastic quiz. You do have to go in and recreate your quizzes, but it's 100% worth it. So I took some screenshots, and then you can go in and play around with it at some point if you want to. They just launched version 2 this week. And so if you look at some of the tutorial videos on YouTube, some of the images might look different because it just came with some design changes, but otherwise it works very much the same. Okay, so the first thing I want to show you are the different question types that are available in Edulastic, because some people have been saying, I don't want the traditional paper or pencil. I don't want traditional multiple choice questions. And let me tell you, multiple choice questions are available. All your basic checkbox questions are available. But then you get some like this, where you put the terms on one side and the students will drag and drop the definitions into the other side. If you've looked at the MCAs lately, they have a lot of more of the drag and drop type questions. So it familiarizes them with that sort of assessment. Plus, this is a way that you can do a matching question without it being on a paper copy. This is awesome especially for ELA teachers, but really for anything. They have passage-based questions. So they put the passage right on the side and then the question next to it, which is how they see so many assessments anyway. And then you can have them dig right back into a chunk of text and answer a question about it. So it's really like a way to have a close reading version of an assessment. So I found a PDF version of the novel, The Wednesday Awards, that we read in class. I copy and pasted just these couple of paragraphs and then asked a question about it on the right-hand side. Here's one where if this was live and not just a screenshot, there would be 4 different sources that I could click through, and each one had a different map on it or graph. And then you can ask a question that says based on source 1 and source 4. So that's really some upper level thinking right there. They have to look at 2 different sources and make sure that the response that they have is accurate of both sources. So an awesome way that you can get that higher level thinking for sure. You can embed videos in it. It's called Chicken Shop Shakespeare, and a guy literally sits in like a fried chicken fast food restaurant and recites lines from Shakespeare. And so when we were studying Romeo and Juliet during distance learning in the spring, I would normally show this video in class, but it allows me to embed it right in the question. You can also embed Google Slides presentations. You can embed Vocaroo sound files. So the questions that you can have can be really, really robust with extra information. And then the next few slides are just going to show you all the different question types that are available in Edulastic. So you have your traditional multiple choice checkboxes, true, false, just the image of how if you want the bubble in the word versus the block layout, all kinds of different things. Then you have drag and drops with a close sentence, close with drop downs menus, close where they enter the text, labeling images, all right? And they have essay questions. They have the passage type questions where they have the passage on one side and the question on the other side. Sorting, so if you want students to put something in order, they drag and drop them into the correct order. Classification, so if you have 2 different columns, like maybe if you're even assessing this is true, this is false, this is a correct sentence with no errors, this sentence has errors in grammatical structure, you could have columns like that. Matching, of course, I showed you an example of. Shading, if you're looking at proportions, highlighting the correct spots on images, having them click on a specific map on a hotspot, having them click on a specific section of a sentence. I've used like independent and dependent clauses, and they have to click on the side of the sentence that is the independent clause. Math, they have all kinds. I'm not a math teacher, so I don't even know. But they have all kinds of different math questions. More math questions with the ability for students to graph, for students to build bar graphs. And then two more things. I know we're pretty much at the end of our time, but I just want to point this out real quick. This is what you see when students are taking the test. As they answer a question, the boxes light up. Red if they got it wrong, green if they got it correct. Now, these students did this during distance learning. So like otherwise I would have gone and stopped this student who has like several red questions in a row and gone and said, okay, I really want you to slow down. And then it also shows you that percentage breakdown. Green is how many students got each question right. So you get this dashboard no matter what for every assessment, so you can see how they did. And then finally, for those who are asking about standards-based performances, every question you put in, you align to a standard. So then at the end of the at the end of the assessment, you get a standards report to see how your students did on each of the standards. And you can get that for each individual student as well if you are looking at standards-based grading. So I'm going to stop presenting, and I know we're kind of at the end of our time, but if anybody has questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. So Darcy's in here moderating for me, and she just asked how it integrates with like an LMS. And so it does connect with Google Classroom. You can import your class from Google Classroom, and then it will automatically post the assessment to Google Classroom when you assign it to them. So that's a great way to do it as well. Any questions that anybody has? Otherwise, let me just pop this link into the chat real quick. And then, like I said, afterwards, I will also add it to the shared resources. Yes, as the students are taking the question, you can answer or see their results live. Yep. So if I see that they're rushing, or I see that they're taking a really long time, I can just swing by those students' desks and see what they're doing. The other thing I forgot to mention about Edulastic is there are a ton. They have a question bank. So questions that other teachers have created that have gone in there, and you can search the question bank by standard. So if you're assessing a certain topic, you could find a bunch of questions already written for you, which is excellent. I love when other people do the work. In Edulastic, there for each student, you just check the box next to their name and you click redirect, and it redirects them to it. And there are a few different options that you can do. I have done it where I have had them be able to see their score, but not like the individual questions. They can just see the overall score that they did, and then they can retake it. I've done it so they can't see at all how they did, but I tell them they got some wrong. Sometimes I have told them which questions they got wrong, but not why it was wrong in any way, and then had them redirect it. And then it does save both the first attempt at the quiz and the second attempt at the assessment, so you can compare how they did on the second attempt compared to the first attempt. But there's just on that dashboard I showed where it has all the boxes, you click next to the student's name and click redirect, and it automatically sends it to them again to do. Any other questions? If you have any questions, I'll put my email address in the chat real quick. Otherwise, look through those resources whenever you have time, and click around on those links, and hopefully you'll find something that was interesting. Thanks for coming, everybody.